On the 4th of May 1988, a controller at the Pacific Engineering and Production Company of Nevada, or PEPCON, chemical plant, placed a call to emergency services. There had been an explosion, he informed them, and now everything was on fire. This would have been a difficult situation for any business, but was a particular cause for alarm with PEPCON. Due to a series of unexpected events, the plant was being used to store a massive excess of a dangerous chemical used in rocket fuel. In January of 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger was launched as part of the ongoing US space program. Much to the shock and dismay of the country and the world, it exploded shortly after takeoff, resulting in the death of all 7 crew members on board. In the wake of the disaster, further launches were suspended while the cause of the explosion was investigated, something which meant some difficult decisions on the part of the many suppliers involved in the space program. PEPCON was just one of these. The plant had been responsible for manufacturing ammonium perchlorate, or AP, a vital component of rocket fuel. AP is an oxidizer. As well as being explosive when heated to very high temperatures, it will massively promote the combustion of materials that it is combined with. Now, with future launches called off, PEPCON was left with a huge excess of this product. This excess was stored in thousands of plastic and metal drums on the premises of the PEPCON chemical plant near Henderson, Nevada, just over 16 kilometers, or 10 miles, outside Las Vegas. The plant was often used to store some amount of product, but it had not been designed with this amount of storage in mind. There were, for example, no fire suppression systems in the areas where barrels of AP were stored. On the 4th of May 1988, employees were at work repairing a building used to dry chemicals as part of the manufacturing process. The structure was made of steel and fiberglass, and had recently sustained some weather damage. Workers were now using welding equipment to make repairs. They were doing so at what was believed to be a safe distance from any barrels of AP, and had also washed down the area to remove AP residue from surfaces before beginning work. At around 11:30 a.m., in the vicinity of the welders, a small fire began. It rapidly spread through the structure, resisting the attempts of workers to control it with hoses. As the fire took hold and it became apparent that the firefighting equipment to hand was not sufficient to control it, plant employees began to evacuate. Those who could used their personal vehicles, while others ran on foot alongside the road to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the fire. After around 20 minutes, a significant explosion took place. This spread the fire still further, to the point that it engulfed the bulk of the AP stored on site. At this stage, another explosion was inevitable, and when it came, it was massive. It was later estimated to be the largest non-military, non-nuclear explosion to take place in the US in recorded history. It had a yield comparable with that of a 1 kiloton nuclear bomb, or 0.25 kilotons of TNT. Emergency services had already been alerted by a call from an executive at the plant. At the same time as this call was received, the chief of the Clark County Fire Department happened to notice a plume of smoke on the horizon. Correctly gauging that it arose from the PEPCON plant, he immediately directed all units to the facility, then got into his own car and began driving there to direct operations. Before he could reach the plant, however, the first explosion smashed in the windshield of his car, injuring him and a passenger and almost causing him to crash. A fleeing employee stopped to warn the fire chief that there was likely to be another, more powerful explosion, and the chief accordingly retreated and pulled his firefighters back to a safe distance before the second, larger explosion took place. By remaining at a safe distance and not attempting to fight the fire until the explosive material had been consumed, injuries among firefighters were kept to a minimum. There were numerous smaller explosions, and a plume of flame continued to burn for several hours even once the vast majority of the explosive material on site had been consumed. This was eventually traced to a ruptured natural gas pipe which ran under the facility. When this was closed off, the fire was finally brought under control, and firefighters were able to approach the blast site. The plant itself had been completely destroyed, and the explosions had caused significant destruction within a 16-kilometer or 10-mile radius. Residents within this area had seen windows shatter, power lines fall, and doors blown off their hinges. Around 400 people were taken to hospital to be treated for minor injuries, including a large number of lacerations caused by broken glass. It was also concluded that the explosion and fire might have released some irritant airborne products. Though these were not toxic, they did increase the overall number of hospital admissions, with a large number of people suffering from respiratory irritation, some from communities as far as 50 kilometers or 31 miles away. As a precaution, many nearby communities were advised to evacuate, although this resulted in traffic jams that took so long to clear that the evacuation order had been reversed by the time many residents were able to get away. Closer to the plant, the destruction was more comprehensive, with cars destroyed and buildings flattened. 2 industrial facilities, a gravel works and a factory that manufactured marshmallows, had been all but completely incinerated. At an airport near Las Vegas, a Boeing 737 that was coming into land had been shaken by the shockwave, but had still managed to land safely. Tragically, 2 PEPCON employees lost their lives in the explosion. One was 56-year-old Bruce Holker, the plant manager. Bruce was a wheelchair user, and there had not been sufficient arrangements in place for him to evacuate as quickly as other employees. The other casualty was 62-year-old Roy Westerfield, a controller at the plant. Roy had survived polio as a child, and the infection had left him with some permanent limits to his mobility. Perhaps aware that he might not be able to escape as quickly as other employees, he voluntarily stayed behind in order to inform the local fire department. In each case, while the majority of employees were able to escape in time, there had been no effective evacuation plan in place for their colleagues with limited mobility. Several organizations investigated the cause of the fire, with reports issued by the United States Fire Administration and the United States Department of Labor. The former of these concluded that the fire was started inadvertently by the workers using welding equipment, while the latter asserted that a natural gas leak from the pipe that ran below the plant was the more likely cause. PEPCON itself initially blamed the owners of the natural gas pipeline which ran below the plant for the explosion, claiming that the fire must have originated there. While it could not be definitively determined if this was correct or not, PEPCON was found to be liable for the damages caused by the explosion. After a long-running legal battle, they were forced to pay around $71 million in compensation, a significant amount given that their insurance policy only covered damages up to $1 million. The PEPCON disaster was one of several chemical-related accidents that led to the passing of the Chemical Catastrophe Prevention Act, later renamed the Chemical Accident Prevention Program. This legislation holds facilities that manufacture and handle dangerous chemicals in Nevada to high standards of accident prevention and emergency response. Such legislation might have made a significant difference in the case of the PEPCON explosion. It was found that the AP on site had been stored improperly in some cases, that staff had not received adequate training, that combustible materials had been used in some buildings, and that previous minor accidents had not been followed by any meaningful change to working practices. The plant near Henderson was not rebuilt. Instead, PEPCON changed their name to the Western Electrochemical Company and moved operations to a new facility near Cedar City in Utah. Unlike the PEPCON plant, this facility was surrounded by an unpopulated no-build zone that was larger even than that which was required by law, and was compliant with new regulations implemented after the PEPCON explosion. Despite this, the new plant did suffer a chemical explosion in 1997. This accident caused 1 death and 4 injuries, but the total devastation of the PEPCON explosion was, at least, avoided.